All right, welcome back everyone to Applied Wisdom, Literature for Living Better. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Skin in the Game by Nassim Taleb.
Oh, fantastic book.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think it's one that, a lot of people who are on this sort of personal growth journey will find a lot of really cool and actionable stuff in us.
Absolutely. I think Taleb's work in general, and this book especially, just really cuts through a lot of the noise and gets to some really fundamental truths about how the world works, about how we make decisions,
Right.
And really how to live a better life, which is, all about here.
Yeah, exactly. So Skin in the Game, maybe we could just start off by what is the basic idea here? What's the core concept that Taleb is trying to get across?
Sure. Yeah. So the core idea is really about this notion of symmetry between actions and consequences.
Right.
If you make a decision, if you take an action, you've got skin in the game if you're exposed to both the upside and the downside. Right.
Potential benefits, but also the potential risks and losses.
I see. So it's not just about reaping the rewards if things go well. It's also about being on the hook if things go bad.
Exactly. It's about having a real stake in the outcome, and that stake has to include both sides of the equation.
Okay, that makes sense. So why is this so important? Why does Taleb think this is such a crucial idea?
Well, he argues that this symmetry or this lack of symmetry really shapes how systems behave, how we make decisions.
Right.
And ultimately, it's really all about accountability.
Right.
When people have skin in the game, they're more likely to think carefully, to act responsibly, because they know they'll be held accountable for the consequences.
That makes sense. If you know you're going to have to deal with the fallout if things go wrong, you're probably going to be a lot more careful in the first place.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And conversely, if you're insulated from the downside, if you're not going to feel the pain, then, you might be a little more reckless. Right. You see that all the time, I think, where people are making decisions that affect other people, but they themselves are not going to be impacted.
Absolutely. And that's where things can get really dangerous. Taleb talks about this idea of fragility.
Right.
When systems or even individuals lack skin in the game, they become very fragile because they're not exposed to the feedback mechanisms that would help them adapt and correct course.
So it's like if you never experience the negative consequences of your actions, you never learn from your mistakes.
Exactly. And then those mistakes can just accumulate and the whole system becomes more and more vulnerable.
So we can see how this plays out in big systems, right? Like in finance or politics, where people at the top might be making decisions that have huge consequences for everyone else, but they themselves are kind of shielded from the fallout.
Absolutely, yeah. There are countless examples of that.
Yeah. But I think it's also really interesting to think about this on a personal level. In our own lives, in our own decision-making, are we really thinking about the potential downsides? Are we really putting ourselves on the line?
That's a great point, and I think that's really where the rubber meets the road with this idea. It's not just about pointing fingers at big institutions or powerful people. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, okay, where in my own life am I lacking skin in the game? Where am I not fully considering the potential consequences of my actions?
That's such a good point. And it makes me think about all the advice we get, all the self-help books we read, the podcasts we listen to. This one,
right.
Are the people giving us this advice, do they have skin in the game? Do they stand to lose anything if their advice turns out to be bad?
That's a crucial question to ask. And it's not always easy to answer, right? Because someone might seem very successful. They might have a big platform. They might sound really convincing.
Right.
But are they actually living by the principles they're preaching? Are they willing to put their money where their mouth is, so to speak?
Yeah, and I think that's where this idea of the intellectual yet idiot comes in, right? That Taleb talks about.
Yes.
The IYI, yeah. It's like you can have all the book smarts in the world, you can have all the fancy degrees, but if you're not actually out there in the real world dealing with the consequences of your actions, you're missing something really important.
You're missing that practical wisdom, that real world experience that comes from having skin in the game.
Yeah. It's like you can read all about how to swim, but until you actually get in the water, you don't really know.
Exactly. You don't know what it feels like to get knocked over by a wave. You don't know how to adjust your stroke to stay afloat.
Right. And so I guess that kind of leads us to the idea of the value of practical knowledge, the value of learning by doing.
Absolutely. And Taleb makes this really interesting connection between skin in the game and the Lindy effect.
Okay, now what's the Lindy effect?
So the Lindy effect is this idea that the longer something non-perishable has survived, the longer it's likely to continue to survive.
So like the older something is, the more likely it is to keep going.
Exactly. Think about classic books, timeless ideas, even certain technologies.
Okay.
These things have stood the test of time. They've proven their value over generations, and so they're more likely to continue to be relevant in the future.
So like they've kind of earned their stripes through survival.
Precisely. And Taleb argues that this is a form of skin in the game because these things have had to constantly adapt and evolve to survive in a changing world.
I see. So it's like if an idea or a practice has been around for a long time, it's probably because it's actually useful. It's actually helpful in some way.
Exactly. It's been through the crucible of real-world experience, and it's come out the other side.
So is he saying that, like, we should just stick to old ideas, that new ideas are always bad?
No, not at all. But he is saying that we should be skeptical of things that haven't been tested by time.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that we should pay attention to the things that have endured.
Right. So it's like when you're trying to figure out what principles to live by, what advice to follow, maybe it's worth looking at what stood the test of time.
Absolutely. It's not the only factor, of course, but it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, it makes me think about, like, even in terms of personal growth, like, what are the practices, the habits, the mindsets that have been helping people for centuries?
Right, exactly. What are the things that have stood the test of time in terms of, building resilience, developing character, finding meaning and purpose?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we've talked about skin in the game in terms of systems, in terms of personal decision-making. But Taleb also talks about it in the context of ethics.
Yes, absolutely. And this is where it gets really interesting because he argues that true ethical behavior isn't just about saying the right things. It's about being willing to put your money where your mouth is.
Okay.
It's about being willing to take risks, to face potential downsides in support of your beliefs.
So it's like you're not really committed to something unless you're willing to suffer for it.
In a way, yes. Think about it. If you're not willing to incur any costs, to make any sacrifices for what you believe in, how much do you really believe in it?
Right. It's easy to talk the talk, but it's harder to walk the walk.
Exactly. And Taleb also makes this really interesting distinction between the golden rule and the silver rule.
Okay, now I've heard of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, but what's the silver rule?
The silver rule is do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you.
Okay, so it's kind of like the negative version of the golden rule.
In a way, yes. But Taleb argues that it's actually a more robust ethical principle because it focuses on preventing harm.
Huh.
It's about not inflicting on others something that you yourself wouldn't want to experience.
So it's more about not doing bad things to people rather than necessarily going out of your way to do good things for them.
Right. And he thinks this is more in line with the idea of skin in the game because it's about being mindful of the potential negative consequences of your actions for other people.
That makes sense. It's like you're not just blindly doing what you think is good for someone else.
Yeah.
You're actually considering whether they would want that, whether it might actually harm them.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important distinction, especially in a world where people have such different values, different preferences.
Yeah. It's like what you think is helpful might actually be really annoying or even harmful to someone else.
Absolutely. So the silver rule is more about respecting other people's boundaries, respecting their autonomy.
Right. And it's about not creating situations where other people end up bearing the downside of your actions.
Exactly, which brings us back to that idea of the Bob Rubin trade.
Right, where you get all the upside and someone else gets stuck with the downside.
Precisely. And I think that's something to be really mindful of in our interactions with others, both in our personal lives and in our professional lives.
So are we creating Bob Rubin trades in our relationships, in our workplaces?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask ourselves. And I think it's a good reminder to always be thinking about the potential consequences of our actions for the people around us.
Yeah, totally. And so I guess to kind of bring this all together, what are some practical things that people can do to start incorporating this idea of skin in the game into their lives?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to be really mindful of who you're getting advice from.
Okay.
Like we were talking about earlier, do they have skin in the game? Do they have a track record of success? Are they willing to put their money where their mouth is?
Right.
If not, maybe take their advice with a grain of salt.
That makes sense.
Mm.
Don't just blindly follow someone because they sound smart or because they have a lot of followers.
Exactly. Look for people who have actually walked the walk, who have actually faced the consequences of their actions.
Okay. What else?
Another thing is to really examine your own decisions and actions. Are you taking risks where you're not willing to accept the potential downside? Are you potentially creating negative consequences for others without even realizing it?
Right. So like doing a little self-reflection, a little self-audit.
Exactly. And then finally, I think it's really important to cultivate a sense of personal accountability in your life.
Okay.
Own your successes, but also own your failures.
Right.
Don't blame others, don't make excuses, learn from your mistakes, and use those lessons to make better decisions in the future.
So it's about like taking responsibility for our own lives, for our own choices.
Exactly. And that's really the essence of having skin in the game.
Awesome. Well, I think this has been a really insightful deep dive into skin in the game.
I agree.
I think there's so much here to think about, so much to apply to our own lives.
Absolutely. It's a book that can really change the way you see the world.
Totally. So thanks for joining us today on Applied Wisdom, Literature for Living Better. And be sure to stay tuned for the next one.
And don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this helpful.
It really helps the channel. See you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.